I see. And we haven't even begun.
Right.
No. I mean, there's no excuse for that. I'm just kidding. All right, so you guys are all doing well. So this is great. You must feel pretty alone in this row right here. You've lost your peers. That's well, it just gives you more room, you know, to stretch. All right. So you guys are all doing well. Does anyone have any questions here before we begin? No questions? Hello? Nothing? Okay, well that's good. So I just wanted to go ahead and share with you, you know, I think the volume's a little too high. Is it not, just a bit?
A little louder than normal.
Yeah, is this better, like that? Or is it still just as bad? It's good? All right. All right. Okay, all right. What the heck is going on there?
Recording.
Recording, all right, okay, all right. So I better be careful what I say. All right, this is not right, okay. You know, I think, are there not some instructors, you know, they have a policy that, you know, they cannot be recorded? I mean, I think that becomes voluntary, right? I think there are some people who have that. Not me, I don't care, but I'm just saying that there are some people who like that. All right, well, anyway, let me go and share with you one assignment that you guys are going to be working on. This is an easy assignment, and so let me go and tell you the extent of this assignment. So here we go. So what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and, given this table, for example, that you're seeing right here, I'd like to go and have you fill in all these empty slots. So the way that you're going to go ahead and do it, I give you an example. So imagine as if you have all these tables with all these columns. Now at this point, you want to go ahead and identify the primary key, the foreign key, and the tables that are being referenced, which means the foreign key, okay? So the tables that the foreign key is referring to. So in table patient, for example, we have patient ID. That is our primary key. And in table disease ID is our primary key. But in patient disease, you notice that it is a composite. And then we also identify our foreign key, and we also identify the tables that it's referring to. So instead of coming up with those diagrams, you know, where you draw these lines, by the way, those diagrams are referred to as ER diagrams, entity relationship diagrams. So instead of coming up with diagrams, you can actually go ahead and fill out a table in this way. And so what I would like you to do is, given the following tables, I'd like you to go and tell me what the primary key, foreign key, and the tables referenced are. And then I'd like you to go ahead and sort of replicate the same kind of thinking, but for you to go ahead and come up with your own table, with your own set of tables, and then go ahead and populate it as you would in this case. Are you with me on that? So for example, in this case, we're talking about flights and airplanes and pilots and all that. So in your case, you'll come up with something else, whatever that something else is. You know, I came up with like 8 examples you guys worked on. You come up with your own, with all the table names and all the columns that make up the tables. And so that's pretty much it. Any questions? Nothing. And so this is so easy that you could probably do this by Wednesday night. Maybe even tonight. But we'll make it Wednesday night. Okay. You know, I keep forgetting that I should come into this class with some kind of a jacket because they have the air conditioning on at full blast. And that's what you did, right? Did you do this like knowingly? You did. You remembered.
Yeah.
How do you remember?
I would wear a jacket though.
Oh, okay, so you didn't remember.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who...
I even had an issue with my right shoulder. I couldn't move my hand to lift it up after these classes, so I'm wearing it.
Wait a minute, you couldn't lift your right shoulder because of this class? This has nothing to do with the cold. You're thinking it has to do with the cold?
For sure.
Who here is a doctor? All right. But I mean, that's an amazing correlation. But you're thinking that because the wind is blowing on your right shoulder, then you just can't move
I
it?
think so, because nothing else could
What about the stress of being in this class? All right. Well, anyway, so we are going to go ahead and, so anyway, we'll make this available to you. And so let's go ahead and move on to the other stuff. So if I'm not mistaken, I think we went ahead and did this. Didn't we? Or no, we didn't do this.
Finished writing the check.
Okay, the check. All right, so we're done. So pretty much, as you remember, what we have done thus far is to go ahead and just create a table of some sort. We create a table. And then we go ahead and identify the column name, the type, the column name and the type, and then we go ahead and put these commas there. And then we know that when we get to the last one, there is no comma. And then what we've also come to find out is that if we want, we could actually go ahead and just put in all these other additional constraints in place. So we could say that, for example, this is a not null, right? We said that you could do stuff like that. Or we could actually go ahead and come in here and we could say default, for example, like, I don't know, I, okay? So we could actually go ahead and put in these default values. So we could do all this stuff with all that. And then, of course, we also indicated that we have char, we have a varchar, we have date, and then we have number. So those are the things. We said there shouldn't be a line in between, okay, so that's a no-no. And we want to make sure that we don't come up with any reserved words for the column names or for the actual table name. And also that we want to go ahead and follow a convention. Anything that belongs to the world of Oracle, we want to go ahead and uppercase it, yes? And of course the stuff that we come up with, don't uppercase it. Now we said that once you go ahead and create a table, you can go ahead and actually what? Get rid of it, right? And you get rid of it using what kind of command? How do you get rid of a table? Drop. Okay, so you get rid of a table using drop. And then getting rid of a table means you get rid of this entire structure along with anything that's sitting in it. What if you want to go ahead and keep the table around, but you want to go ahead and get rid of its contents? How do you get rid of that? Delete, okay. Now, we did say that there are two ways in which you could actually go ahead and get rid of the contents, right? One is delete, the other one is truncate, okay? And then what happens is with one of them, you could actually go ahead and restore the data. Which one? Delete. You can restore the data. And of course, that's why when you delete, it actually takes longer because it's actually storing it somewhere. Whereas with truncate, all you're doing is you're just, it's very fast. You just move, some pointer from one place to another. It's very quick, but the data is unrecoverable. Okay, so that's the other piece. All right, and we said that when you actually go ahead and create a table, the fact that you have just created a table, that entry about what you've just done is being stored somewhere inside of Oracle, is it not? So where is the place that contains a list of all the tables that have been created? Do you remember? User underscore tables. So here we have an Oracle table that contains the list of all the tables that folks have created. So I could actually go ahead and do a select and then put an asterisk from user underscore tables, and it will give me a listing of all the tables that have been created by the user. That would be you, okay? So there's that. Okay, and so I think that's really pretty much it. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and come over here now. Now, what occurs is, let's just say that you have created the table. And let's say that now you're thinking you need to go ahead and modify this existing table. It may or may not have data in it. So can you do it? And the answer is yes. You don't have to go ahead and completely eliminate the table and recreate the table. You could actually go and say, let me go ahead and make an alteration to the table in some way, shape, or form. It's kind of like you have a human being that comes into this world, but you feel like you need to go ahead and make certain enhancements, okay? with this existing human being. And you could do the same thing with these tables as well. And so this is where the alter table syntax comes into play. And so here we go. Let's just say that you have all these columns and you want to go and add another brand new column. How do you do it? Alter table, patient. So notice instead of create, you're using alter. And then you just go and say, you know what, I'd like to go ahead and add. You identify your column and you identify its type. And what occurs is now you have this brand new column that is added to the end. How do you know? If you do a describe on the table, which is what gives you the structure of the table, you will find it. Now you could actually add more than one column. So look at that, alter table. And then if you have more than one thing, then look at this. Parentheses comes into play. So this kind of begins to look like a create table statement. And then you go ahead and just list the name of your tables. And once again, the very last one, you don't have a comma. And so look at that. Those two have now been added to the end. Yes? Now, let's go ahead and find out what occurs with regards to modifying. You know, if you have a table like this, and this table at this point in the game is empty. I have not put any data inside the table. And so I'd like to go ahead and change something. So let's just say that, for example, I don't like the type. Maybe I don't like the length. Or I want to go ahead and modify some other stuff. Now, when you go ahead and take a look at this, you notice that I'm able to go ahead and use the modify command. So there it is, the modify command. To go ahead and modify the actual length, to go ahead and change the type. You can go ahead and do pretty much whatever you want, as long as there is no data in there. But once there is data, as you can imagine, there are limitations, right? Because if you have, let's just say, taken the F name, and you have put in somebody's first name in there, you cannot go ahead and say, you know what, I'd like to go ahead and take that type, and I'd like to go ahead and make it a number, right? You can't take the name Iraj, because what's going to happen with all the existing data that's in there? It's going to be confused, yes? That's right. All right, excuse me for just a moment here. What? I can't even log in anymore. All right, so that's what's going on with that. Now, imagine as if we go ahead and insert something. So here, once again, we have our table that's been created. And then I actually go ahead and insert some data this time. And now I want to go ahead and start modifying things. Let's go ahead and find out if it's possible. Now, you take a look at this, and you know we can go ahead and go down here to see what is going on. Well, I guess that'd be loud. So, you take a look at this. Alter table F name varchar to 19. The question is, when you look at F name, before it was 20, now we're making 19. Is that okay? What do you think? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the data that's in there. That's F name. That's F name, right? Now, do you think that is, would 19 characters be sufficient to be able to store that information in there? Yes, Jill is only 4 characters. So as long as it doesn't have to get rid of any data, it says, you know what, you can go ahead and come up with a smaller width. Let's go with this one. What happens if you go ahead and make F name, make it a size of 3? Would that be problematic? It's too short. You make it 29, would that be okay? No, oh, that would be okay, yeah. 29 is way too big, so that's great. And then what happens if you actually go ahead and take F name and you want to make it a number? No, that wouldn't work, okay? And then of course F name, you want to go ahead and make it varchar to 20, and that of course would be okay as well. Or here we have patient ID. Patient ID, look at that. It's that 11, right? And 11 is a number, and we actually go ahead and say that it's a number. And by the way, notice that when you have a number, when you're inserting the data, you don't actually insert a number using single quotes. You just go ahead and put in the number. It is only when you're dealing with textual information or dates. So this is textual, date. That's when you go ahead and use single quotes. But a raw number, you don't go ahead and put in single quotes. So basically, what is going on here is if you actually have something like a patient ID that takes in a number, and you have a number, and now you try to go ahead and change it to a char, it will actually go ahead and complain. But of course, if you have a number and you go ahead and have this one right here. Now this is kind of interesting. Not only are you saying that you want to go ahead and make it a number, but you also want to go ahead and give it an attribute. Okay? So keep in mind that what we can do with these columns is not only do we want to go ahead and say what kind of information you can store, but maybe you go ahead and restrict it even further to say that, you know what, you should never leave it empty. Or that, you know what, maybe you can leave it empty. So in this case, when we say null, we're saying that you have the ability to go ahead and leave it empty, which, by the way, is what is going on at the default level. In this one, we're saying, you know what, you need to go ahead and put something in there. Now, what is interesting about this modify is we just say modify the name of the column, and I don't even deal with the type. I just go ahead and put that attribute in place. So our conclusion at this point then is the following. You can actually go ahead and use the alter table syntax to go ahead and modify something about a table. Yes? Now, one of the things that you could do is you could modify. Modify means there is something that's already in the table, some column, and you want to go ahead and change its type or maybe some other attribute. Now, you have the complete freedom to go ahead and make that modification if there's no data. You could do whatever you want. But the minute you put data, it better be compatible, okay? And as long as it's not messing with the existing data, then you're all fine. That's what modify is. So you guys are all good with this so far? Okay, so that's great. Okay, so let's go ahead and, so you can just go over this. By the way, somebody was asking me that, they were saying that sometimes, what you're saying doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So let me go just share with you something. One thing that I realized, as I was going to school, and so I realized this a little late in life, but I realized that if I go ahead and sort of capture the material before I come to class, of course, it's very helpful. And I remember at one point I became such a believer of this that before even the semester began, I would actually go ahead and read all of my books. I would actually go ahead and just go through all the pages in all of my books. So when I came to the classroom, I would actually be having a conversation with the instructor. And there were like 2 or 3 people who would be doing this. And I realized that they would be doing the same thing. So if you're finding yourself being somewhat lost, it's because you're coming in here expecting to go and capture all the information on this first try. Now, some of you are really good at this, but others, if this is the very first time, then it's going to be somewhat problematic. And then, of course, you begin to sort of lose interest, so keep that in mind. Now, just to make sure that you're all good, let's go ahead and see what is going on here. Okay, so, how you guys doing? All right, you guys are doing well. Okay, good. All right, so let's go ahead and find out what is going on with all the rest of this. Now, let's say that you have this table and you don't like a column in the table. So guess what? You can also go ahead and draw a column. So in terms of the table that's going on, so here is our table, and you have, these columns. And of course, you also can go ahead and put in this data. So we said that you could actually go ahead and drop the entire table. You could go ahead and delete the data itself, but you could also go inside the table itself and say, you know what, I'd like to go ahead and get rid of, for example, that column. Okay, you could do that as well. Or a bunch of columns if you wanted to. Now, of course, we need to make sure that when you're dropping this stuff, that you're not violating anything. So for example, if it's a primary key, okay, that of course is a foreign key in some other table, then that becomes a problem, right? So all those integrity checks still need to be in place. So as long as you're not violating any big things, you'd be able to go ahead and drop columns. So here we go. So in this case, we're dropping a column. So I go ahead and add this column, and then I decide to go ahead and drop it. And when you're dropping, take a look at this. You need the parentheses, otherwise you'll get an error message. And what is interesting as well is you don't say drop columns, you just say drop. You don't say add column, you just say add. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, if you want to go ahead and drop a whole bunch of columns, take a look at this. You say drop, and then once again parentheses, and then you go ahead and identify the columns that you want to go ahead and drop. Now, there's an issue that comes up. When you want to go ahead and let's just go back in here. Let's just say that you have this table, and it's got all these columns. I mean, all these rows, okay? And of course, you have, here's one column, here's another column, here's another column, here's another column, okay? And then let's just say that you're interested in dropping a column. You say, you know what? Maybe I was storing, let's just say, something about, I don't know, gender or race. And we've come to realize that we can no longer store that information. We're just not living in that kind of world where we need to store that information. And so you want to go ahead and get rid of this. Well, when you go ahead and try to get rid of a column like this one right here, you see there's all this data that you have that goes with it as well. And so when you drop the column, it's going to go ahead and take a while. Just like when you go ahead and delete, it's going to go ahead and take a while. So what you could do instead is you could actually go ahead and say, you know what, I'd like to go ahead and take this column and set it to unused. And so what Oracle will do is this will just flag it. Flag it as if this column does not exist. It has nothing to do with the data. The data is still in it. It doesn't really care. But it's going to go ahead and pretend as if that column and everything that's inside of it has just completely disappeared. Okay? Now, so if you go ahead and take something and make it unused, do you think that you can actually go ahead and set it back to used? It would make sense, right? It would make sense. Just like, when you go ahead and truncate, all you're doing is the cursor is over here, you're putting it over here. Could you recover the data? No. And guess what? The same thing is true here. When you go ahead and take something and make it unused, you cannot make it used again. Now, when you go ahead and take a look at the Oracle forums, folks have actually complained. They said, Oracle, what the hell are you doing? Why do you not give us this ability to be able to go ahead and make some, these columns used? And so, well, we have no answer. So Oracle is not making that feature available to you. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so, and the way that you're doing it is quite simply, you just go ahead and say set unused, and then you list the columns that you no longer want. Now, this is an important point to keep in mind with regards to any upcoming tests at some point. Now, when you actually go ahead and set these columns to unused, and when you go ahead and do a describe on the table, the question is when you do a describe, do you see any references to the columns date of birth and gender? What do you think? No, it's as if those columns have completely disappeared. They're no longer there. Now, of course, when you go ahead and set it to unused, you've just flagged it, and everything that you do with the table, it's going to go ahead and treat it as if those columns are not there. But you know what? That column, along with all the data that is sitting there, it is still taking up space. And so it would be nice to be able to go and release that space at some point. And so at some point, when you have less traffic on the system, you could actually go and say drop unused columns. And that will actually go and get rid of all the data. Because what is going on is all the data is still there. The only reason why you're doing something like this, as opposed to dropping the column, is because you know that if you have 1 million records and you have to go and drop the column, it's going to go and take you 2 hours. Well, you cannot go ahead and hog all the system resources by deleting this column at a time when everybody's using the system. So you have to go and do it, let's say, at midnight, when no one is using the system. And so that's why you go ahead and set it to unused, and at some point during your off hours, you actually go ahead and get rid of all those columns. And then, just like you're able to go ahead and rename a table, guess what? You can also go ahead and rename a column. So you just say rename column. Now that's kind of interesting. You actually go ahead and use the word column. Isn't this great, the consistency that you see in Oracle, okay? You know, this is the one thing that I hate about this programming language. Truncate, you cannot untruncate. Unused, you cannot set it back to used. Places where you don't use the word column, well, then here we have a place where you actually do go ahead and use the word column. And you have to remember all this for some reason. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that in mind, I think we are ready for some brave soul to go ahead, or actually brave souls, to go ahead and come here and try to see what they can do. Listen. All right.
Question.
Yes.
When you use the drop unused columns, does it delete all of the unused columns?
Yes, that's exactly it. You went ahead and flagged them, and then at some point when you drop it, it's going to go and take everything that has been flagged as unused, it's going to go and get rid of it. All right, so who wants to go ahead and come forward and take a crack at this? Yes. Let's see. All the way in the back. Right there. How you doing? You want to try it? Is that a yes or a no? No. The person right next to you. Do you want to do it? No. The person right next to you. No. The person right next to you. No. The person right next to you. All right, let's go ahead and give it a try. All right, so there's this chord here. So there we have it. And so we want to go ahead and have some audience participation. Okay. And you don't need to worry about uppercase, lowercase. Just type it as you feel. Okay. So look at that, we're adding, and so he's saying add date of birth, and then you just go ahead and put that there. He's identified the name of the table, and then there is the type. Does anyone have any objections? No objections. Okay. Yes, you have objections.
Doesn't DOB char need to be in parentheses?
DOB and char need to, now you think, okay, so he's saying that date of birth, it needs to be in parentheses. Would you agree with that or no? No. Under what circumstances does it need to be in parentheses? Well, dropping, okay, but is there, I mean, can you add more than one thing? You can. And so when you add more than one thing, then that's when you go ahead and use the parentheses. So if you want to go and say that, you know what, I got like 2 things, 3 things, 5 things that I want to go and add, that's when you use the parentheses. But if it's only one thing, then you don't need to worry about it. Okay. So you can have a, that's okay. So you can just go ahead and do the next one as well. So modify the data type to date. Now, notice in this case, let's go ahead and take a look at the keywords. I say add, and so he's using add. I say modify, so as you can imagine, the keyword that we would be using is modify, all right? So modify means it must already be in place. So can we get some help there? What do you think? So look at that. It's alter table again because we're modifying something about the table, and specifically right now it's about some column. All right, so this is great. What do you think about that? So just modify, okay? Modify and then date of birth, date, okay? So we've done that. And then we're thinking he's so good, we need him to go in and continue. Is that what you're thinking?
No.
No, okay, we'll just have you do this one more and then we'll have you quit. Drop the column F name, okay? So let's go ahead and have you drop. So at this point, we're modifying something about the nature of the table itself, or altering something. So he's using the alter table, and then drop. And then what is interesting is at this point, when we're dropping, we don't say drop column. The keyword column is completely missing, okay? And that's fine. Now drop date of birth. Look at that. He is just saying I'm done. But is there something about this that we don't like?
But we need the.
We need the parentheses, okay?
Oh.
So the parentheses is a must when it comes to dropping. Well, since you are so good, let's go ahead and have you come up, okay? You can go and finish this up. And then, once again, there is no problem. You know, if you have an issue here, we'll go ahead and fix it up together as a collective. All right, so whether it's one column that you're dropping or many, you go ahead and use the parentheses. And that's another piece of inconsistency that we have in the world of Oracle, okay? You know, when you add, you don't need any parentheses when you're dealing with one. But when you drop, even when you do have one, you need parentheses. Who can remember all this stuff?
For 3 should it be first name, not
Oh. Well, I guess you could, but you're right. It should be first name. But that's okay. You know, I think he was just in such a hurry to get out. He just said, you know what, the hell with this. I don't care. The pressure is too much, isn't it?
It's not that. It's just, like you said, learning it for the first time. And
Well, you've done
it's
so
my
well.
nature to be meticulous and correct all the time, so I don't like having to have instant perfect recall.
Yeah, you know, my wife has that same problem. You know, she wants to be correct, you know, and so this, of course, doesn't really make a very joyful conversation when you're actually having an argument, because she has to be right. But then I consistently prove it wrong. And so,
Women are always right.
no, we can say that, but but the reality that comes out from the conversation, it turns out to be something very different. Exactly.
Complete or
Oh, sorry, we're having a side conversation here. Okay, so alter table person set unused date of birth. What do you think about that? Do we like that? Can someone confirm that that is actually correct?
Yes.
Yes, you like it. Okay, so we like it. And then finally, we come to this last one. And then, you know, by the way, it says also drop all the unused columns. So there's that one other piece to this. Can you finish that up as well?
This fight number 5.
So this actually will go ahead and set it to unused, yes. It flags it. But let's say we want to go ahead and just get rid of all the columns that are flagged. So how do you do it?
I forgot.
Well, let's go ahead and just see. Can we get, how do you get rid of, yes?
It's drop unused.
Okay, drop unused.
Drop unused columns.
Columns, is that right? Is there the keyword columns that you would use as well?
Yeah.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so there we go. Can, so alter table person. It's okay, we don't care about the spelling.
Alter person.
Alter table person, and then you're saying it would be what? Drop. And it's all one word, unused. Okay?
That's it.
And then columns. So you have to go ahead and spell out, and that's U M N S. Okay, so that's close enough, but at the second O is a U. Okay, so this one right here, that would be U. Okay, so is there anything else that we need to do with that? Are we good? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. All right, and then it says, oh, okay, so you're done as well. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for that. So we need one more person. Okay, yes, come on up. All right, it says rename the L name column to F name using the alter table syntax. So let's go ahead and get that straight as well.
Just move that up to.
Now, let's just, it just so happens that the syntax that you're looking for is right above you, right there. Is there something that we have there that you're not seeing in your syntax? Just look above, in the box, right there. What do you have, what do we have up above that we don't have in yours?
I see it.
That's right, the keyword column, yeah. All right, well, I think we are good with that. Well, thank you, sir. All right, good, good, good. I think we need a collective hand for everyone. Okay, so this is good. Okay, good.
So what is the difference between drop the column and the subtotals? I don't know, not the technical difference, but why do you use it?
Why do we do it? Because you see, what happens is when you drop a column, okay, you're not just, it's not just some flag that you're setting. You're actually getting rid of the data, okay? And so in wanting to go and get rid of the data, you need to go and move the data somewhere else, okay? There's all this movement that needs to happen. So if you have 10 records versus 10 million records, it's gonna go and make a difference, okay? Now, that's gonna take some time. So if you have 10 million records, it's gonna go and take a couple of hours for you to go ahead and get rid of that information. Now, if you go ahead and make it set unused, you don't get rid of the data, you just flag it. You say, you know what, let's just imagine as if this column does not exist. All the data is still being taken up. It's taking up space. You're just leaving it where it's at. But in terms of the functionality, it's as if that column does not exist. And then at some point when you have time, okay, when no one is using the system, you say, you know what, I'd like to go ahead and get rid of everything that has been flagged as unused. So then that space would be released. Yes?
Is there a way to change like the order of the columns?
No. Yeah, the order of the columns is the way it is. And of course, the order of columns, for the most part, it doesn't matter. Unless, when you're doing inserts, when you're doing inserts, as you've come to find out, you sort of look at how, in what order you went ahead and created the columns, and your information is going to have to go and correspond to that order. And so if you don't like it, then you're going to have to go ahead and drop and then redo it. But of course, it doesn't really matter, because you could go ahead and just modify the order in some other way, not in the actual structure, but in your insert syntax.
How can we one row or two rows, specific row?
Okay, so what is going on is when you actually go ahead and when you do a select from some table, like table 1, right? And if you have all these records, it's going to go ahead and just give you all of that information. Yes? Now, maybe you don't want to see all that information. You want to go ahead and see only, let's say, 2 of the rows. Or maybe you want to go ahead and see only this row right here. So then here you actually go ahead and say where, and then you put some kind of a condition here. And the condition is the condition that's going to go ahead and bring up this row. Like, for example, where the salary is, like 50,000. And maybe for this row, the salary is 50,000. Well, for delete is the same thing. You go ahead and say delete from T1, and that will go ahead and delete everything. But if you want to go and get rid of this one, you just say where, and then you identify your condition, and that will go ahead and identify. Now, with truncate, it's the entire table. But with delete, you can go ahead and say, you know what, I'm interested in only these few records. You want to go? Oh, okay. So there is this syntax called rollback, and so we'll talk about it. And so rollback will actually go and get the information. So you have a certain window of time, because what happens is there are times when you actually go ahead and right after you have deleted, you go ahead and put in this other syntax. That other syntax will go ahead and do an actual save, means you can get it back. But if you haven't put in these certain kinds of commands, you still have the opportunity to go and grab the information back. All right, constraints. Well, so what kind of constraints are available to us? Now, so what do constraints mean to you?
Restrictions, limitations.
restrictions, right? So limiting, okay? So the constraints that we know of here, one of them is primary key, foreign key, unique key, check constraint, and check constraint. What is check constraint? Well, check is like, we know what primary key, unique key, foreign key is, okay? But check constraint is, let's say, if you want to go ahead and put some other kind of limitation. Let's say you want the salary to be between, I don't know, 20,000 and 90,000, okay? If anybody's outside of that range, then do not accept the data, okay? So you can go ahead and put in these special criteria, okay? Or people have to be born after a certain period of time. You can actually go ahead and put those conditions in play. So that's where the check condition comes into play. And then we have the non-null constraint. And by the way, the non-null is part of the check condition. Now you notice that we have these abbreviations, okay? PK, FK, UK, CK, and NN. What are these things? You see, what happens is when you go ahead and create your constraints, you can actually go ahead and give your constraints a name. Okay? So why would you do that? You have a primary key, you've decided to go ahead and give your primary constraint a name. Or your unique key or your foreign key, why would you want to do that? We know our columns have names, but why would you want to go ahead and give your specific constraints a name? Well, it just so happens that it may very well be that you may want to go ahead and get rid of a constraint. If you want to go ahead and, let's just say you've created this foreign key constraint, or you've created this primary key constraint, and you say, you know what, I created it, but I don't want it. How do you get rid of it? Well, one of the ways that you can get rid of it is by going and getting a hold of its name and saying, you know what, I want to go and get rid of this constraint associated with that name. And that's how you do it. Now, there is this convention that is used, which is when you're naming your constraints, you would use these suffixes. Now, these are suffixes and not prefixes, which means it goes at the very, very end of whatever name you come up with. So let's go ahead and find out what is happening with this. Look at this. You know, aren't you glad that you're actually here listening to me? Because if it wasn't for me, you'd have to read all this. And who can read this? You know, I sort of look back, and you know, right now I'm trying to read a book, and I've had this book for about like a month now. And I think that throughout this past month, I've just been able to read like 10 pages. That's it. You know, whenever I open up the book to read it, I fall asleep. I just can't do it. I just cannot finish the book. Now, I used to be like an avid reader at one point. I mean, I would just sit down for hours and I would read, and I would enjoy it. But now I can't even read. You know, my brother's got this, big library of books. And I tell him, so when was the last time you picked up any of these books to read? And he says, you know what, it's been like a few years now. I mean, he's got like thousands of books. And I told him, I'm going to go and take your books, I'm going to go and set them on fire. That's what I'm going to do.
That's not good.
That's not good.
No, you should never say
Do
that.
books even have any value now?
They do. I have a whole bookshelf of books too.
No, we all have bookshelves, but do you read them?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Why?
I love my books.
Now, is it, so you have some issues? No, no. So are these like fiction, non-fiction?
It's a variety.
It's a
Like
variety.
I've got the whole Harry Potter selection, and then I've got murder. Like it's a wide variety.
Oh, I see, okay. Yeah, you know, I just watched the movies.
Yeah.
All right,
The
okay.
books are better.
The books are better,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. You know, actually, I should tell you, I should not reveal this information about myself, but I will. It's okay. You know, I remember the last time that I actually, when I had finished this book, you know, I was, with a group of people. They said, you know what, Iraj, you're going to have to go and read this book. And I said, you know what, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to go and do it. You know, this was like the fastest selling, best-selling book of all time that came out. Do you know what that book is? It's not the Harry Potter series. 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh God.
Do you remember that? Yes, and that was like the fastest selling, best-selling book. That was just amazing. And so then I was forced to go ahead and read that.
Did you seriously read
I
it?
did.
Oh my
I did.
God.
And then I was forced to even watch the movie.
I won't even do that.
All right. But then I was forced to watch the second one. I walked
No.
out of the movie theater. I just couldn't do it, you know. All right. Well, anyway.
That's horrible.
So then moving on. Then Let's just continue on. All right, so well, anyway, so we're talking about constraints. Take a look at this. Here's a constraint, primary space key, and take a look at this. So, you know, I define the column, patient ID. I define its type. Now, usually right after a number, I go ahead and put a comma. But you notice I didn't put a comma. I continued. I continued with the constraint. Now, if you remember, I had said a few moments ago that you could actually go ahead and name your constraints, right? And you could come up with these suffixes. Now, in this case, have I come up with a name? Is there a name? Do you see a name? Do you see a name? No, not for the table, not for the column, but for the primary key, which is a constraint. Do you see a name? No. You don't see a name. So if you don't see a name, so then what happens? Then someone is going to go ahead and give it a name, right? And so Oracle will actually go ahead and come up with its own name. Now, when that happens, that's somewhat inconvenient. Why? Because if you want to go ahead and mess with the name at some point in the future, then you have to look up the name. And that name is very, very cryptic because it's got a whole bunch of numbers in it, okay? So it's for this reason that if you feel like you are going to go and mess with this constraint to go and come up with a name, and we'll find out exactly how that's being done. So in this case, of course, you know, when you're inserting, you know, there's 11 John Smith. And of course, when you go to insert another row, if you go ahead and put in 11, look at that. That would be a violation of the primary key, yes? And so Oracle will actually go ahead and tell you that, you know what, you've just violated, and it will deceive you by telling you that you've just violated the unique constraint. It's really the primary key constraint. It just so happens that whether you violate the primary key or the unique key, it'll tell you that the unique constraint has been violated. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then, if you want to go ahead and find out exactly, once again, what the name is, well, one of the ways is to go ahead and violate it. Look at that. And then it actually will go ahead and tell you the name of the constraint. There it is. Will you remember that name? Hell no. Okay? So there's that. So imagine as if you wanted to go ahead and confirm that this is really the name of the constraint. If you wanted to go and confirm that, where would you go? Well, we said that Oracle has this ability to go and sort of keep track of itself. Yes? Keep track of the tables that you create, keep track of the constraints on the various columns of the tables that you create. Well, where's that information? Well, it just so happens that if you want to go and grab a hold of the tables that you've created, you go to User Tables. If you are interested in looking at the constraints that you have created, you go to User Constraints. Yes? Okay, so that's where you go. That's where Oracle is maintaining its own stuff. So, of course, you could go ahead and do a select asterisk from user constraints. But you know, this particular table, it's got too many columns. And you probably don't want to see all those columns. You're probably interested in only a few of those columns. You probably want to go and see information only, let's say, on that column, that column, that column, and that column. Okay? So let's go ahead and find out how that's done. Take a look at this. Select table name, constraint name, constraint type. From user underscore constraints. But then I am not interested in seeing every single constraint for every single table that I've created. I'm only interested, let's say, in the constraints pertaining to one of the tables. And if you remember the question that you asked, how can I go and see information for, like, not all the rows, but maybe some of the rows? And so this is the condition. You're saying where table name equals to patient. Now this part is key right here. So we created a table called patient, and look at the spelling of my table. It's all in what? Uppercase. Because guess what? Inside of Oracle, all the tables are stored in what? In uppercase. Okay? So that's something to keep in mind. Even though when I go and create the table, I just go ahead and put in create table patient, and I go ahead and type it in as lowercase, Oracle is storing it as uppercase. So that's something to keep in mind. And then, what do you see? It says, you know what? you got a table called patient, and it's got a constraint name. There it is, constraint name. And then it also tells you the constraint type. What is the constraint type? Well, somehow I need to know whether it's a primary key, whether it's a foreign key, whether it's a unique key, and so we have all these types. So if it's a primary key, you think its type is going to be what? What is the type? What is the type that Oracle is going to go ahead and sort of store inside of its user constraints table when it's a primary key? What is it? What is it? P. What is wrong with you guys? I mean, how many more arrows do I need to go ahead and put here? Although, you know, I tell you, it's not a big deal. I mean, I don't feel like I'm being ignored in this class. That's completely okay. Okay, but I think it's in your best benefit to maybe sort of participate a bit. Okay, I think this is just you'll just get something out of it. Okay. All right. So P is for primary key. All right. Now, what happens if it's a unique key? U. Okay. What happens if it's a check constraint?
C.
What happens if it's a foreign key?
F.
No.
No.
That's right. Okay, that's right. You thought that there's a trick here, and there's a trick. That's right. Because what is the purpose of foreign key? It is there to go and reference another table, is it not? It is there to reference another table. R. That's right.
Wow.
R. That's right. So isn't this great? Okay. Let's go ahead and find out more about this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drop the table, recreate it, and take a look at this. Once again, we have the patient ID, and then we have the type, and then it's going to be a primary key just like before. But take a look at all the stuff that I've just added. So I don't like the name that Oracle gives to it. I want to go ahead and come up with my own name. Well, what is the name? So there is the name. Patient underscore ID underscore PK. Well, so let's go ahead and decipher this and find out what's going on. Well, the PK is primary key. That's the suffix that we've come up with. Now, by the way, this is just a naming convention. You don't have to name it like this. You can call it crap if you want, okay? But we just think it's more readable. Now, the other piece of this puzzle that you need to keep in mind is that you're limited, okay, with regards to the name that you come up with in terms of the number of letters. It cannot go, I think, beyond 18 letters, okay? So if it's more, then you need to go and abbreviate things a little more. Then the reason why I came up with this naming, take a look at this. I am in the table patient, and specifically I'm placing this constraint on the column patient ID. So embedded in the name is the table name, the column name, and also the kind of constraint that I have. Yes? And now, whenever you want to go and give your constraints a name, you are going to go ahead and come up with the keyword constraint. So keep in mind, the keyword constraint has only one purpose. You go ahead and use it because you want to give your constraints a name. That's it. That's the only purpose it has. And take a look at this. There is that comma at the end. So you are defining your column, and there's the comma. And then you go on to the next column definition. And then once again, the same thing happens. There it is. That's a violation right there because you're repeating the 11 two times. And then you can go ahead and just confirm that this is the name that now Oracle is going to be giving to that column name. And look at that, table name, constraint type. And take a look at this, patient ID PK. That's the name that I just gave to it. It's this one right here. Compare this with what we had a few moments ago. Look at that name that we had. CISP350 whatever. Yeah? Now, you can also go ahead and have a composite primary key, right? A primary key that is comprised of more than one column. Now, this is invalid. Why is it invalid? What do you think? Why would you think that's invalid? Yes?
Can't have two primary keys.
You cannot have two primary keys. Every table can only have one primary key. So the question is, how do I go ahead and create a composite primary key? How do I go ahead and tell it that, you know what, both of these together are going to go ahead and make the one primary key? The way that I do it Now this is important. Look at that. Here I have my column, my type, and then there's the comma. I'm done with that column. I go do the same thing with this one. I do the same thing with this one. I am now done with all of the columns and their types. At the very, very end, what do I have? Constraint. And then I come up with a name. Look at this. I go ahead and use the keyword constraint whenever I want to come up with a name. And then I go ahead and identify primary key, which is the kind of constraint that I want to go ahead and create. But now I have all of these columns here. Which one of these columns is going to go and make up my primary key? F name and L name, for example. So look at this. I go ahead and tell it exactly what columns make up my primary key. Now compare this to the way it was being done before. Before, when we were doing it, okay, we would actually go ahead and identify the column, and then while the column definition is still not done, I go ahead and say primary key. I don't need to go and put anything in parentheses because we are on that column, so we know exactly what is going to make up the primary key. But at this point, we have already done all of our column definitions. We may have 10 columns there. The question is, out of these 10 columns, what is the primary key? And it is for this reason that you need to go and have the parentheses and identify all the columns that make up the primary key. Yes? So there's a name that we give to this. You can go ahead and define your constraints either at the column level or at the table level. What you're seeing right here is table level. And why is it a table level? Because all the columns have already been defined. You're going to go ahead and do it at the very, very end before the table definition ends. Whereas at the column level, there it is. Here is at the column level. I'm defining the column. I'm defining the column. I'm not done. I don't see a comma. There it is. Finally, I see a comma, and then, of course, I have defined my column. So can somebody tell me the difference between table level constraints and column level constraints? Who wants to go and take a crack at this? I do it. Yes.
Column level is while you're still formatting, and table level is once you're done.
We like it. Okay. All right, and then when do you go ahead and use the constraints keyword? All right. My apologies. All right, so when do you use it? When you're naming it. That's right. Okay, so when you're naming it. And then can you tell me what is the suffix that you would use for a foreign key?
R.
Well,
I'm sorry, F.
well,
No, underscore.
FK. So this is all about naming, okay? What you want to go and come up with. Now, inside of Oracle, okay, it's going to go and have a type associated with a constraint, and that's where the R comes into play. So I know that there's a lot of, these small little minute things that I'm sharing with you, and you're thinking, I will never remember any of this, right? Maybe? Okay. So it'll just come to you. You'll find that, it's amazing. By the time we get done with this next series of assignments, you will know this stuff in your sleep. That's a pretty frightening thing. It is, right. All right, so there is, oh, did we just do this? Oh, so that's the primary key. Oh, here's another one. So take a look at this. Here is the table patient. And there is the column definition, column definition, column definition. And then look at this. At the very, very end, I say it's a primary key. But then which one of these columns is going to be my primary key? I go ahead and identify in parentheses what it's going to be. It's not a composite, okay? but I've decided to go ahead and define this primary key at the table level. So in essence, what we're beginning to find out is that you're able to go ahead and define these constraints either at the column level or at the table level. It's up to you, for the most part. There is an exception that we'll talk about in just a few moments, but for the most part, you have that option. If you go ahead and decide to go ahead and do it at the table level, you need to go ahead and make sure that in parentheses you identify the column that's going to be involved in your constraint. If you do it at the column level, well, you just go ahead and put the name of the constraint, which is the primary key, foreign key, whatever. All right. And so there is that. All right. Now, imagine as if you go and create your table, as we have right now. And then we have decided now to go ahead and create our primary key because we forgot. We want to go and do it after the fact. There's all this data that's sitting there. I don't want to drop the table and recreate it. I want to just go ahead and modify the existing table. Well, we know that whenever you want to go ahead and modify something about a table, you go ahead and use the alter table syntax. So you say alter table syntax patient. Now, at this point, does this have a primary key? No. So then let's go ahead and add a primary key. There it is. Now, you notice something interesting about the syntax. What do you observe about the syntax? What is it similar to? The column level definition of a constraint or the table level definition of a constraint?
Table.
Who said column level? You said, why did you say column level?
It looks similar to the format used when you're constructing the key in the column level.
Okay, let's just go ahead and just bring it up here very quickly to make sure that okay. Oh dear Lord. Okay, all right, so let me just go ahead and take this. Okay, so we have that. And then let's go back in here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this, okay? So, so take a look at this. This right here, it's table level. This right here is column level. There it is, the column definition. There it is, it's at the table level, yes? And the point that I want to go ahead and make here is that when you go ahead and identify the constraint, in parentheses you go ahead and put the column. Whereas in here, you just go ahead and put in the constraint, okay? Now, when you are actually doing an alter table syntax, you could either add or you could modify. Yes? To go ahead and modify or do something about your table. Now, you will notice that if you go ahead and use the add syntax, its syntax for adding a constraint will look like the table level. If you go ahead and use the modify syntax, you will find that its syntax looks very much like what you would do at the column level. To go ahead and prove this to you, take a look at this. Altered table patient, and I'm using the keyword add. Yes? So, I said, if you're looking at add, you're adding a primary key, its syntax is going to look just like what you would do at the table level. Take a look at this. Primary key, patient ID. Look at that. Primary key, patient ID. Now, you could also go ahead and create this primary key in another way. You could actually go and say alter table patient. You can use modify instead. Why? Because you're modifying some attribute about your column. So take a look at this. When you take a look at this syntax, you begin to see it looks very much like this syntax, doesn't it? You just identify the column and then primary key without the type. Do you see that? So this is, now the only reason why I'm emphasizing this is because this is the one way to go ahead and just make sure that you don't get confused with the add or the modify syntax. If you go ahead and just think that the add syntax is going to be just like the table level and the modify is going to be like the column level syntax, then you won't get confused. Now you're thinking, I'm already confused. Okay? But what I've done here, I'm hoping that maybe you'll go home and you'll go ahead and do the same thing, and then in your own peaceful environment, you'll be able to go and see what I've just indicated to you. All right. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Well, all right, so there is that. And by the way, let's just go back here as well. When you want to go ahead and, let's say I want to go ahead and give my constraint a name using the add syntax. How would I actually go ahead and give my constraint a name? What is the keyword that I need to use to go ahead and give my constraint a name? You go ahead and use the keyword constraint. So what I could do here is right in here, right in there, I could actually go ahead and put some information. So what do I put? I put in what? Constraint. And then whatever name I need to go ahead and come up with. And then the rest of it is as it says. Now, you will find that this is exactly what you would do when you're dealing with the table level. You go ahead and put constraint, and then the name of the constraint, and then primary key patient ID. What happens if you want to go ahead and use modify? How would you actually go ahead and do it in this case? Yes?
Not necessarily for the modify, but my question is, when you're using the table level, just at the primary key and patient key, do you have to be done with setting all the names and the parameters for all the columns in the table, or can you do it once you have finished up with those columns that you're intending to use as the key?
Okay, so that's a good question. So what happens is with Oracle, it says that when you're looking at table level definitions, and this is a table level definition because it's happening after the columns have been described, you could actually go ahead and put it at the end, or if you want, you could actually go ahead and put it in the beginning. It's all fine. I don't know if you can put it in the middle. I've never seen anyone do this, and I think the reason is because it's just too confusing. So you either, and usually what happens is people do it at the very, very end. That's the convention that is most likely seen. So once again, the question stands is, if you want to go ahead and give this primary key right here a name, how would you do it? Well, how did we do it here? How did we do it here? We said patient, number, and then what did we do? We went ahead and in here, went ahead and put constraint and then some name. Well, this is no different. we say modify patient ID, and then right in here, we go and put constraint and then the name. It's all identical. How's it time?
We're fine.
Oh, we're 5 over? Oh, no wonder I saw there were some people who were actually thinking, what the hell is this guy talking about? Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we leave, let me just go ahead and just mention one more thing here. You're thinking that, do I have anything to go ahead and practice with? And so there is that exercise 1.5 normalization, but I'd like to go ahead and give you something else as well. And here's the thing. Now, at this point, I'm no longer looking for your school files. I don't care about the school files, okay? So this is what we'll do, is you're gonna go ahead and create these 2 tables. There it is, candidate table, party table, okay? And then you're gonna go ahead and do everything that I've indicated, which is dropping, adding, drop the alter table, and all of this stuff right here. And what I want you to go ahead and do is I'd like you to go ahead and go into SQL Plus, and I want you to go ahead and give me a print screen and paste the print screen of what you've typed in along with the message that you're getting back from Oracle right in there. Are you with me on that? So just, now how do you get a print screen? Well, imagine as if here I have DOS. There it is, okay? And I can just go to the snipping tool, SNI, okay, in Windows. If you don't have Windows, you need to change your machine. Okay. You go in here, and you just go ahead and snip the stuff that you're getting from Oracle, okay, all of that, your syntax and the message that you're getting from Oracle. Then you go into these white cells right here, and then you just go ahead and paste it. And this is too big, of course, you're thinking that's ugly. You could actually go ahead and sort of resize this. Well, I didn't resize it, but you could. Look at that. That looks beautiful. And so you want to go and do it for each one. Now this will not, I guess we can come up with a timeline of this as well, but I'm going to put this out there as well, so you can look. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
Just like spooling, how actually.
Well, this, for me, because you see, spooling, I would have to look through your stuff. This, I can look at the question, I can take a look at what you've done, and see if you've done it correctly. All right, anyone else? Yes?
So you don't have to do the spooling thing, you just have
Yeah,
to.
as far as we're concerned, spooling sucks.
Yes.
Yes. And then if you remind me next time when we come back in, I'm going to go and share with you that SQL Plus sucks. And so we'll actually go ahead and start using SQL development. Okay, anyone else? Well, good luck. All right.
What was the